All right, so I've been talking about structure function as it relates to the baby structure. The conscious associational thinking area, the projecting forehead, and the primary visual area, the projecting back of the skull, which is the occipital area of the brain. But that's the baby structure, and it's not concerned with language. It's concerned only with its immediate emotional reaction to what it is confronted with. It's learning by what it sees, peripherally by what it hears or what it senses. So what happens when we develop our own sense of identity? And that, thank God, takes us to Albertine and the I. What is our identity? Is it in the brain? Is it located in the brain? Well, you're on, Albertine.
This is a illustration of the left hemisphere of the brain. And as Daniel was mentioning, the baby picture, the primary focus is on the conscious associational thinking. So it's the forehead, and then the back of the brain is the primary visual center. As the baby evolves and grows up and becomes more identified with itself, the focus will be on the temporal side of the brain, where the belief system is. So that's where the person, the child, the adolescent start identifying with the I, and therefore it's basing all its experiences on past experiences and how it relates to its environment. So from a reaction point of view, you can make choices based on what happened to you in the past, or you can remember that you still have your forebrain and still look forward with your associations and not just filter your experiences through what happened in the past, so that you can make a choice based on the positive future that's possible.
May I?
Yes.
All right, so let us remember the temporal lobe of the brain, and it's a big one. It's a huge area compared with the conscious associational thinking area, is focused on intense feeling. So everything that you are challenged with or confronted with in present time is going back to how you felt about anything similar in your past. And all of that sense information, how you felt, what you heard, how it tasted, how it smelled, will all come together in a microsecond. And that is where our reaction comes from, but it's always intense. And it's based on our learning experience of life, which is focused on pain, fear, and fear of future pain. What we learn as we grow up and create our identity is what to avoid: fear, pain, fear of future pain, and the possibility of actually using the conscious associational thinking area to reflect on the positive possible future and how we could create it is the last thing that we come to, because our brain immediately is survival oriented, survival physically. So fear we avoid, pain we try to avoid. And of course we don't do it very well. So we try to avoid it so we don't have to deal with it. I'm sorry, carry on with identity, dear.
What I can add about this is, if I focus only on my past experiences and what I believe to be myself based on the past, am I reacting with emotions from the past, or am I also including what I'm consciously thinking in the present by, paying attention to my immediate environment and what I'm absorbing and observing visually? am I really in the present, or am I reacting with anger and frustration and fear of more pain from the past because of my belief system around my experiences from the past? And that's where one needs to be able to remember to just be quiet and pay attention to what's going on really in the present moment, and not just think about, is this what I really believe myself to be? I'm gonna just talk stream of consciousness here about the I and identity and the adolescent growing up from the baby, and thinking about what it should be, how its role should be as a young adult, and the belief system around that.
Good.
And it's about, sex roles and
Excellent.
what's expected of he or she
Excellent.
based on belief systems.
Excellent.
Just to be clear about that, the structure function, the change in structure function is about adapting to a new environment and basing
Challenges and
the
opportunities.
challenges and opportunities on what he or she thinks should behave, as opposed to
Yeah.
being honest about what it is it wants.
We have 3 periods of life, and there are 3 different bodies involved. Just as a reminder, one is the childhood structure, which has a very definite kind of function because of its structure. And then we come to adolescence. And instead of the relatively honest and spontaneous child reactions, we get the adolescent. And it is at the time of adolescence that we clearly define, or at least more clearly define, our I. What is our identity? What do we have to defend? Our identity, what we believe is true. And there are structural changes that go along with that. But more on the identity process, Albertine Fawn.
Yes, the identity revolves in this area here on the temporal lobe of the brain. It's where the belief system resides, and that's where we filter the information based on the past experiences, and we make our conclusions from there, as opposed to if we were to use the front of our brain, the conscious associational thinking, to see what's actually in the bigger picture, complemented by the primary visual center. If we were to look at the bigger picture, we would see that we have choices to create the future that we really want.
As
Instead,
opposed to just reacting according to how we have reacted in the past.
exactly, as opposed to reacting, which can be
So it's
automatic.
the difference between coming from the temporal lobe, which is all about intense emotion and past experience, to the frontal lobe, which is all about, well, what we can do now that's different.
Being in the present, as opposed to in the past.
So how did we get our I?
We got our I by thinking about what it is we want, what it is we don't want.
Mostly what it is we don't want, like what we want to avoid. We don't want more pain. We don't want more fear. So how have we handled fear and pain in the past? And that's what's the reaction is jammed into the present. But who is reacting to that? Is it the me of childhood? And the answer is no.
No, it's the me based on the past.
It's the I we have become to believe is true about us. And where does that come from?
That comes from limiting our belief system.
Well, it comes from limiting our belief system, but why do we limit it?
Because when in the face of a challenge, we go into automatic fear of wanting more pain, avoiding pain.
Sure, but who do we believe is the I? Who is Albert, or what is Albertine Fahn's I?
It's the ego identification.
Yes, it's the ego. It is what we feel we have to defend, which is our beliefs, what is true for me. And what is true for me based on my past experience may be totally useless in reacting to whatever the opportunity and the challenge is right now.
It is a point of reference, though, for what it is you don't want and then creating something that you do want.
Sure. So when you are confronted or threatened, what do?
I just become quiet and I put my hand on my forehead and I tell myself to look out of my right eye so I can engage my right brain.
I hope you really meant your left eye so that you
Oh,
could
did I
engage
say
your right
backwards?
brain. Sure you did, but I make that
I'm
mistake
dys-
regularly
I'm
through.
dyslexic.
No, certainly that was wonderful because what you did, you become quiet. Mm-hmm. Actually, is that a successful way of avoiding further negative input from your brain?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, so
And breathing, getting back into breathing as opposed to talking and reacting.
yes. In other words, you give yourself a pause,
Yes.
and controlled breathing is certainly a pause, and controlled breathing does not mean it means slowly inhaling and slowly exhaling and making the choice consciously to do that. At which point you're not talking because you're controlling your breathing. And this gives you the opportunity, as you cleverly said, to take a look at what is actually going on out there,
Becoming present to what's really going on.
becoming present to what's really going on. A reaction is not being present to what is going on. Because a reaction, by definition, is always coming from the past. You're doing it again. Mm-hmm. And if it has not been successful in the past, it will not be successful now. So you are very clever because in being quiet, you are giving yourself the opportunity to think up here as opposed to react according to feeling, which is here. Feeling based primarily on memory of. Oh, yeah, sure. There's no power in reaction. There's only antagonism and anger, fear, and other unproductive emotional swamps that we get stuck in. And how do we express our anger or our fear? By rationalizing verbally, trying to convince the other person of the correctness of our position, whatever it may be.
Yeah, validating the emotions based on past experience, usually.
Yes, that's wonderful. Validating our own lack of success in the past and trying to make our suffering respectable.
Honorable.
Yes, honorable. Well, and of course it isn't, which is really wonderful, and we know that it's not. So how do we stop that? We stop that, as Albertine has said, by doing something consciously to put on the brakes. But it's not retreat, and it's not avoidance, and it's not withdrawal. It's just giving ourselves, by controlled breathing, the opportunity to think.
And be present.
And hopefully be present and accepting and receptive and interested, maybe even fascinated by the possibilities.
Even maybe being willing to look at something differently.
Well, certainly if you don't make the decision to be willing to look at something differently, you won't, which is the usual human condition. And unfortunately, because it's such a good example, I bring it up again. The Jerry Springer audience and the Maury Povich audience, in which all they do is rationalize and justifies their own positions, shrieking and screaming and not listening to the opportunity that is presented to them, which is, why don't you just shut up and listen? Maybe then you could make some decisions that will take you more toward what you want. But we're so tied up with who we are, our ego, I am special, important, should be understood. They are all our enemy because they are not listening to us.
Well, one would think that after hearing ourselves talk about the drama we're recreating, one would want to create something different.
Well, that's wisdom. But on the other hand, in the face or in the horror story, the maelstrom of negative emotion, that's the last thing we think about because of who we believe ourselves to be. Yes, you're right, based on our past experience and what we have learned. But what we have learned, unfortunately, is not just useful information. What we have learned is what we have developed as a habit, which is only a knee-jerk response to challenge. So yeah, we've got to put on the brake, and it's easy as a human being to do that. Unfortunately, it's difficult when issues of our sex role, our sexuality, ourself as the individual we believe.
Yeah, and it's
ourselves to
also
be.
what we believe is expected of us.
Oh yeah, and what we believe is expected of us, which is back to ego, which is back to ego. Sure, and we have lost our power when we are trying to make correct our expression of our ego, when we're rationalizing, when we're justifying. Oh, yes. Well, the little kid was born with this structure, and that structure had within it a purpose, and that purpose is individual, and it is based on the mechanics of the structure you were born with.